I wanted to welcome everyone to this NCA webinar on generational diversity. For those of you that weren't able to join us in Arizona last month, this subject was actually brought up by both of our guest speakers, Deborah Gardner and Michael Fazio. And we didn't plan that. It just worked out that this is becoming a hot topic in both customer service and coworker and employee-employer relationships. So we've invited Stacy Soyak here, has agreed to join us. Stacy works with Travel Guard and is the manager of our training and development team here.
Thank you, Jill, and welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking time to hear a little bit about generational diversity. From a service provider standpoint, how do you work to ensure, From a service provider standpoint, how do you work to ensure that you're providing the best customer experience you can? How are you working to ensure that what you're doing is viewed as valuable to each person with whom you come in contact with? Currently, we find that we have 4 different generations acting as consumers, as well as 4 generations that we interact with in the workplace. Every generation has different life experiences which have helped to shape their preferences, their needs, their tendencies, their behaviors, their values, as well as their expectations that they have as consumers of either a product or service. Each generation has specific likes and dislikes as to how they are treated and being serviced. With that said, I hope that you'll find value and benefit to spending time today looking at the generational diversity. Hopefully this will help you create what we could call a generational toolbox, which will give you and others the ability to gain some insight and use that insight into how we're able to structure some of our services that we provide and gain better customer experiences through the different generations. In today's session, we're going to take a look at some of the characteristics and values that in general define the different generations. We're going to look at what makes them tick. We're going to look at how we can use those characteristics to our advantage. We'll also take a look at some other overall benefits to generational diversity, and after all this, we're going to take a quick look at what's really important and what stays the same. Okay, so to get us started, let's spend a little time looking at some of the more specific generational differences. First of all, generations are generally defined in terms of having a common sense of identity with something. Members of any given generation will typically have shared some of the same formative experiences, which usually will consist of major events of the time. This would include things such as war, tragedies, major school shootings, 9/11. It will include things such as high-profile deaths or assassinations or other events like the state of the economy at any given period of time. It could also include family dynamic changes, and not to mention, or we shouldn't forget, technology and media and how that's shaped the generation. It's with these shared cultural experiences that have a powerful and lasting impact on how the generations have been shaped. These shared values lead to what is commonly called a generational archetype, or it's their patterns of behavior, it's their generational values, it's their identity. It's what makes them who they are, who we are. So let's spend a little more time looking at some of the differences within the generations. First, let's take a look at traditionalists. Traditionalists are typically defined by including those who were born between the years 1925 and 1945. Now, if you were to go out and do research, there's multitudes of information out there on the different generations, every one of them is going to define the specific time period a little differently. There's no way to really pinpoint it, but in general, for this presentation, this is the time frame that I found most consistent. So traditionalists have mostly been shaped by the hardships they and their parents or their families experienced as the result of the Great Depression in the 30s, as well as World War II. Many of them were too young to fight in World War II, but they would remember the hardships that the families faced, both with things such as gas rationing and just simply the experience of having a family member away from the homestead. Values and characteristics of this generation include being dedicated to their jobs. This is the generation that started with an organization and ended with an organization. They were extremely hardworking. Their duty and loyalty to their jobs and employers would typically come ahead of any pleasures that they would have experienced on the home front. They had a deep level of respect for both leadership in the organization and authority outside of the organization. Respect back then was based on the position you held. So whether it was a manager in the or leadership in the organization, they respected them for that position, or authority outside, the police department. They respected the police for the position that they held.